that from what do they call it, from Treasury, it also means that this is a fully funded project. And as it becomes a fully funded project, now, as it is right now, with all the, what do they call it, the challenges we've had as a country, and fiscally we do not have that kind of money, we haven't received our Treasury approval one. Now, once we've received that Treasury approval one, then the process begins in earnest of the feasibility study. And then when that process of the feasibility study starts in earnest, what we are going to do is we're going to call more meetings like these. Because this is not, what do they call it, the first time we're doing this, as I said to you. In 2005, 2006, and 2007. And at that point in time, I worked for the private party, not worked for government. So I had been on both ends of, what do they call it, of how to do this. And at that point in time, then we will start the process. We have, what do they call it, been notified of a preliminary Treasury approval one that has been given to us. It has a set of conditions that we have to comply to. It will probably be in the next 12 months or so that we'll be able to clear those conditions, and then we will be in full swing with, what do they call it, with the feasibility. Now, once we're in feasibility point, then the details, and I'm still saying to you, the details. We are fighting here when we both don't have the details. Clearly, the details of what goes where. And ultimately, what is tunnel, what is, what do they call it, what is viaducts, and what is at grade. And we have noted all the concerns. We have noted the area where somebody has said, put it in Malibongwe. There's enough of a servitude there, and everything else. Even putting it in Malibongwe, there will be somebody who gets affected. So we would have to think through it. In Malibongwe, does it go in tunnel? Is it a, what do they call it, a bored tunnel? Is it a cut and cover tunnel? And if we're making it a cut and cover tunnel, how many of the accesses in and out of that area are actually going to be affected? So that, in earnest, is, what do they call it, the process that is going to be followed. Now, I have a set of issues that I want to deal with up front if they're going to be asked in here. Now, your houses remain your houses. Your houses, you can modify them as much as you want to modify them. You can sell them and do what you want to do with your house. You still remain the owner of the property. They be able to come through and tell anybody that, no, it is safe to buy a house in Sharon Lee. I will do so. I have no problem in doing so. No, you can call me. You can call me. No, you don't call me. Just call me, and then I can talk to the person over the phone. So the issue of, what do they call it, of your house and selling it and buying it is Sharon Lee remains a community. We still remain a 400 strip of, what do they call it, of what could be a railway line. It could go into tunnel. It can go on a viaduct. It can go. There is all of this. I mean, right down to the fact that if I were to think unhappy about certain things, but think about it. For me to go at grade, in order they call it, in Sharon Lee, and talking at grade is on the ground, Sharon Lee, I would literally have to shut down the N1 for probably in excess of 12 months. Because I would have to, what do they call it, either cut through it or cut underneath it, or cut over it in whatever form. And as I cut over it, I'll have to consider, because all this redirecting and working with, what do they call it, affects not only it affects the users of the N1, it affects those who are coming from across the other side of, what do they call it, of the freeway. It affects where we had come from. All railway lines similar to ours are built to be flat. They're built to be flat for two things. One, for speed. Secondly, for maintenance purposes. And as we do that, there isn't any way. So a railway line is a funny thing. You don't just decide now that I'm going to tell. It doesn't work like that. Railway lines don't like that. You might end up with a lot of people on a tunnel wall or on the ground. Yeah. Okay, that is fine. I'll take the point of order. Yes, sir.
I've got two questions. The first question is related to the first process where we're talking of the route determination, where Victor was actually taking us through the Section 6 of the legislation. My first point that I want to ask pertaining to that is that in terms of the in 2021, when there were particular different routes that were options, and those options we had to select which particular route we wanted. In your website, do you have the figures as to saying that people selected this particular proposed route? How many selected that proposed route? Secondly, also pertaining to that particular process in terms of the route determination, obviously the MEC has already proclaimed that, but we are still aggrieved in terms of that process because we actually submitted our own grievances or questions pertaining to that particular process, but we don't see our comments actually there. And unfortunately, due to naivety on myself, for example, I didn't actually, necessarily take a screenshot, a screen grab of my process in terms of that. And only now, when you are actually bringing up your comments as minimal as they are, it's actually questionable as how come there's only few comments compared to, as you can see, why Sharon Lee's as easy. Because we did actually raise something. The second question now, in the current design that we have, is we are saying that we are now in the design phase. What I also wanted to find out is that in addition to what is currently happening, where are we in terms of timelines? Are we now at a process or where you're now starting to consult with us in terms of procurement? Or I think that's the leg that we also want to get an understanding, because we've gone through the processes of legislation, but now we want to know where are we, what is the next step, are we going to be consulted, and when exactly. And the other part of the environmental impact assessment, unfortunately the screen was not showing us the whole steps of the assessment. What does it entail? What does it mean to us as the affected parties? Because we are going to be affected indirectly or directly. Thanks.
Okay, so
Could I ask you a question? Because I think it's
somebody wants to do a follow-up here. Somebody wants to do a follow-up here.
Are you still going to have a question and answer session afterwards?
This is it. We're doing it now. Oh.
Okay. Jennifer Thomas has just asked, based on what the guarantee that will be made is to a prospective buyer. If the route hasn't been confirmed, what then? And the second question is, would you buy a house in Sharon Lee in 2023? And then the third question is, will the expansions decrease the ticket prices to make this more affordable to the average citizen and make the expansion viable to National Treasury? And then I'll ask the other questions.
Okay. The question at the back from the gentleman was the issue of the route determination process and what happened to the rest of the, what do they call it, of the routes themselves. So the routes themselves, to a great degree, remain in play in certain parts of them, where, what do they call it, where there is no way that we can actually come through here. Then the route will be moved to either align to, what do they call it, it will be a specific deviation of the route on the area, or it will be a complete change of the route altogether. We did it for, what do they call it, for Gauteng 1. The original Gauteng 1 sits on the western side of the N1 freeway. The residents of, what do they call it, of Midrand didn't want it there, and it was relocated to where it is now on the eastern side of the freeway, which was further away from, what do they call it, from their houses. And those things can be done. I mean, there was somebody who was very aggrieved at the back saying that it can't be done. It always has to be done. The NEMA, as I said to you, is one of the most powerful acts we have in this country. There is no way that we can bypass it in any form. The second question that you had, say? Timelines. Okay. So we are looking at, what do they call it, and at within a 12-month period, we will start the feasibility study in itself of where exactly the line runs and what what part of each of the sections of the line is would become clearer, and you will be consulted multiple times through the feasibility study.
Sorry, but that's in contradiction because your colleague earlier stated that the feasibility had been conducted.
Yeah.
So, I need a mic.
That's fine.
Sorry. my voice doesn't carry. So I referred to the process as preliminary design. When Tebo speaks about feasibility, it's taking that preliminary design and making sure that it is feasible in all aspects. So when he speaks about feasibility design, it's the feasibility of the preliminary design. Sorry for the confusion.
Can I have a glass of water? Am I a watered glass of water?
Did we answer, sorry. Did we answer the questions or not?
I just need
No, sorry. There was some.
So, are you comfortable, say, at the back? Not really. Okay. So the EIA in itself is the whole thing applies. So the National Environmental Management Act, the Environmental Impact Assessment itself will carry everything in it. I'm not saying everything is the actual act itself that sits on the top, and the, what do they call it, the specific specialized studies that sits underneath that. Water, fauna and flora, socio-economic issues, the impact on, what do they call it, on business, the social related issues that go with that. And there's been numerous projects that have been stopped more purely by the social issues that are there than anywhere else. And that has to be followed accordingly. And so the whole thing applies there. It is a huge project, and we can't pick parts of the, what do they call it, of the act on which to work with. Let's go back to the questions online. Let me take another question while we'll go back to the questions
Sorry,
online.
let's go to. Okay.
Hi,
Yes.
thank you for meeting with me. Sharon Lee is an amazing community, and you are affecting so many lives, and I don't think you have the full extent of this suburb. I don't know if it's on.
It is on.
It is on, yeah. The problem is, when you issued the map on the 25th of May, every person in Sharon Lee could see that this train was going straight through the community, and you are literally dividing the community in half. Whether you go with on-grade, off-grade, underground or not, the people are under the impression it's on-grade, it's cutting through a community. And you might be able to sell sand to the Arabs, but you are not going to sell a house in Sharon Lee with a train running straight through it. And that is the simple problem that we all have. The sooner you can come up with a solution and tell us, if it's underground, I don't know, for the whole community, I'll be happy underground. But my house is sitting like this verge here. I don't want that verge in my back garden. I don't. I want to live in Sharon Lee. I want to be able to sell properties in Sharon Lee. We've worked here for 22 years. My business has been established in Sharon Lee. You know, we're a wonderful community. Our kids can go to school. We can go down to the shops. But this, if it goes ahead with the proposed map on the 25th, Sharon Lee is not going to exist anymore. And I don't care what proposals you come up with, but we cannot have a community cut in half. And I am just pleading, please listen to the people of Sharon Lee. We have until we get a resolution as to which way the How train runs. And I thank you for your time.
I'm happy with that, ma'am. I'm happy with that, ma'am, and what do they call it? And I'm comfortable with what you've just said, and I what do they call it? We do not take you for granted, for the mere fact that I will tell you now, the current part of what do they call it, of how the process unfolds, with the route determination and all of that. Normally, you just send in your comments and taken care of on the basis of the design in the next phase. I have made the time. And I personally said to, what do they call it, to our stakeholder management team that I cannot leave this as it is. So it is not the last of the engagements, and that is why I'm pleading that we find a way of being able to talk to each other. And I am happy with the way you've addressed the issue accordingly, and I'm happy with that. And we will, what do they call it? We will take all the issues that have been raised by Sharon Lee and put it into consideration as we, what do they call it, as we continue with the process. Thank you, ma'am. I don't think I'm worth the water. My mouth is dry, so continue. Continue, ma'am.
Good evening.
Sorry, the people that are in the back, we need some space if you'd like to come in. People outside.
Good evening. Just to follow up on what Kate was saying, generally in Sharon Lee, I think the majority of the people are very concerned about the value of their properties. We've just had a rates increase, and if the value of our property declines, what we want to know is the municipality going to reduce the values? Mine has just gone up 300,000-400,000. And, you know, there will be problems with noise and vibration, etc. So, you know, the value and market value of the property is going to decline. I don't care. It's certainly not going to increase. And we want to know who's going to compensate the local population for any decrease in the values.
I just asked them for every question, if you can just give a brief repeat,
That's
because
fine.
the people online can't hear.
Okay. The values of properties are going to decrease, and I don't want to argue the point. The point is taken, and I've noted it as such, and I don't want to argue the point. But we've done 2 studies independently by other people. Every area that, what do they call it, that the railway line runs through, and there's a station near them. In 2 successive areas, in 2 successive processes that we ran, the original one had shown a year-on-year 3% increase in property values within the 5-kilometer radius of, what do they call it, of any of the station. And Sharon Lee sits squarely between Randburg Station and Cosmo Station, which is here at the Dome. Now, that would benefit this area highly. Question, and I'm not, what do they call it? And we are, the studies are on, what do they call it, on our website, and they can be shared. The information comes from Light Evaluation Company that does that work. The study that we compiled together, both of them, the 2014-15 one can be shared with you, and the 2018-19 one that we put together can be shared with you. It's not a secret, it's a published document, and it can be shared with you to show that everywhere where, what do they call it, where Gauteng has been, proper 10-kilometer radius of any particular station, you were getting around 2.5 and all of and that amount of property increase. I don't want to argue what do they call the point. I'm just simply saying to you, we've got data to prove contrary to what do they call it, what we're talking about. But we will share the data with you, say. No, that is fine, sir. That is fine. There's another one that who's the gentleman who said he's going to quote me? You can quote that guy too. He says he's going to say thank you. No expensive German cars.
Hi, thanks very much for being here today. I have 2 elements that I want to just run by you. One is that I'm in the process of selling my property to relocate to Cape Town. I've had an assessment done on my property, so I know what the value is. And obviously, I've spent a lot of money making sure that my property is sale ready to get maximum amount of money for my property. You can give me all the answers that you want here, but there's still perception out there, and that's massive. So you've done all the things you need to do to make sure that everyone's aware of it, but at the same time, you've also created a massive amount of fear and panic for potential buyers who want to buy our properties. They're not at these meetings, they don't know all this information. So by default, you've created that perception out there, which ultimately has the potential to impact my ability to sell my property at the maximum price. It would be very interesting to see, when I do look at putting my property on the market in the next 3 weeks, what I actually get for my property in relation to what it possibly would have been sold for prior to this process happening. And what would the compensation be from your side if it is a negative impact based on the fact that the estate agents who work in our area know what the average prices are, what we would have been getting for those properties, and if it's impacted us, what are you going to be compensating me for that? So just as you've mentioned Lightstone, just something as an observation. We recently went through this on a property that we own at the South Coast, where we had a Lightstone assessment done on a property, and it came in at 1.3 million. The actual estate agent evaluation was 1.8 million. So it does make me wonder, when you're talking about Lightstone, how that is actually going to give us a true and honest reflection of the value of our properties. You know, and the other thing that does worry me is, am I going to be sitting in limbo while I'm waiting for my property to be sold? I can't afford to do that. I've committed to go to Cape Town. I have to make sure I get maximum impact out of my property.
Okay. All right. All right. The gentleman here in the front was going to ask a question. So let's go back to what they call it, to the issue you're asking. Ma'am, I'm well aware of the issue that you've raised, and in what they call it, I'm an engineer. So once I start telling you about marketing, you must know that I can say a lot of things that I could be dangerous with. Now, what we're going to try and do with what they call it, with the reputation and what they call it, and the team in marketing, is to be able to see how we can work in and around the issue of making sure that the information we're talking about and the issue of how this is so far away from what they call it, from the point at which we could have a line running exactly that, and what that line means should be communicated properly. And I take your, what they call it, the issues you've raised fully, and we will take it back and look at it at how do we communicate better? How do we? It's a process we followed, and we all err. So to me, as I look at it right now, as we're continuing with it, is the manner in which this was put out into the market. We were following the law, because that in itself has its, what do they call it, its own challenges. But we do now, what do they call it, recognize that this affects communities, this affects a whole lot of, what do they call it, of places. So me drawing a line saying that this runs here has affected your life a fair bit, and therefore we need to manage it accordingly and make sure that we can put the actual conversation out there and make sure that what we're doing here, I mean, the same way we put this online for people to view, not only those who couldn't make it here, but to the wider, what do they call it, audience out there, we should communicate accordingly. Now, in terms of compensation, we are not at a point as yet where the railway lines runs here. And that's what Victor was trying to explain by being elaborative about the descriptions of this is the point at which this happens. It is at the point of now us saying this is the 80-meter strip, and this is exactly where the railway line runs. And these are the properties that are, what do they call it, that at that point in time, once we have, what do they call it, have taken the properties, that the compensation is triggered. At the current moment, the line runs there, and it's still subject to a design and can be moved around. But what I take from the conversation with you is that we have to communicate better and make sure that, what do they call it, the wider community out there understands that that line will still be moved.